Aloha, Peter. It must be Thursday.
Aloha, David. Yes, it is indeed. Amazing how fast it comes around. I
Yes, it
feel like
is,
these
and
weeks fly
and
by.
they do. And a week ago Thursday was our live event from Las Vegas. Sorry you couldn't join us in Las Vegas. It was a great Google Next conference.
No, I'm sorry I missed it, but in watching the conference and listening to you guys and the podcast last week, it is some of what they've released is pretty impressive, and I'm actually, especially some of the video tools they let out were, to me, unbelievable. I think the technology is clearly accelerating at a rapid rate.
It was pretty interesting to see, and some great looking tools. And to no one's surprise, agents were the topic of the day. Everyone wanted to talk about agents.
Of course.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. But you also miss the opportunity to walk thousands and thousands of steps every day just trying to get anywhere.
No, I
Um,
know, and I do miss that. I mean that would have been actually not a bad thing.
yeah, yeah. That
So
I hey, but it was 95 degrees, so you were hopefully not sweating where you were as
no, I
we
was
were.
freezing. Yeah, no, I was a bit
So,
jealous. It's okay.
all right.
Good old New York and New Jersey, not the same.
Yep. Well, anyway, but the good news is we have stuff to talk about today.
Yes,
We won't
as we always do.
reminisce about the Google event, although I think it is worth saying that playing around with it so far, the hype around Gemini 2.5 Pro seems to be warranted. Like it's a very solid model.
No, it is. It
Yeah.
is. And in fact, last week when you guys were all there, I actually spent quite a bit of time playing around with it because I wanted to get used to it. I wanted to see what its capabilities were. And one of the things I've been doing a lot with, and I don't know if I mentioned to you during the week, was I've been using it for coding. I've been using it for developing code. And going the vibe coding route and trying to see, what is real and what is not, and how we can apply it to businesses and how we can make our lives a lot easier. And what you rapidly realize it is a very powerful model, and it can really do some very powerful things. And especially when it came to coding, things that in the past would have taken me literally months to do, I can now do in I want to say minutes, but a lot of cases minutes. But like everything, there's limitations, and you have to understand the parameters around it. But it is it is impressive.
That's phenomenal.
So,
I think it's I mean, it seems like it's almost become custom. Every time a new model comes out, everyone talks about how incredible it is, and they are. Like every model is making further improvements. But this one in particular felt like a very solid set of advancements. And I think maybe part of what was so interesting was it raised the bar across a whole bunch of different fronts, right? Around coding,
right,
around some of the things that, again, not necessarily strictly part of the Gemini 2.5, but the VO model and around image generation and video
right.
generation, just around general reasoning tasks. I mean, on so many different fronts, we saw a lot of progress coming out of Google. So that was cool.
Right.
Um, but,
And
this week or next week, it'll be someone else stealing the next headline for the new version of the
well,
model they release.
and it's OpenAI. I mean, let go of 4.1, which has a whole bunch of enhancements. And
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, every week is something else out there. It's this pace of change is incredibly rapid. And I think if you're a business person, you kind of throw your hands up and go, do I go left or do I go right? What do I do here? And what are the capabilities? And what do I even apply this technology? And
Yeah.
I still think that's incredibly relevant. I mean, I think you and I look at it from a uh, always looking at it from a technical perspective, because you and I, at the end of the day, we're engineers, we're technologists, we love this stuff, but how do you apply it to real business problems and use it as a force multiplier, which clearly you can with the power of these tools. It really is mind blowing.
So that's actually a great segue to our topic for today, which is, what are some of the barriers to getting AI solutions into production? Because as fun as it is to play around with AI solutions and to do vibe coding and things like that, like you and I both know, and we've been in corporate
Right,
settings where, the lesson is loud and clear, which is if it doesn't get to production, it in the end, it just doesn't matter, right? A solution
right,
that you can't really execute doesn't add any value other than
right.
whatever amusement and personal education you got when developing it. But you've got to be able to put things in production. So I think that's
No,
our topic.
yeah, that is our topic today. It's talking about moving some of these things into prod and how do you do it. And, but AI, I think, like most things, it's more than just the process of moving technology into production. It's a lot more than that. I think, especially with the artificial intelligence tools, and it really starts at the very beginning. And it's even, I would say, take it even earlier than that. pilots, POCs, whatever you want to call them, are incredibly important. But to me, it's just the thought process that goes into choosing the right pilot POCs that have the highest probability of getting into a production environment. To me, that's a big part of it. And I think,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I think I shouldn't say people, organizations forget that. They kind of look at this from a very traditional technology approach. And that is, you and I have said this a million times, the wrong way. You
Right.
can't look at it as a pure tech play because it's most definitely not a pure tech play. In fact, that's the least of what it is.
So
What do you
let's
think?
talk about that. I think it's a really interesting point you raise, which is that people sometimes pick POCs that, you could, in retrospect, you might look and say, well, that was never going to make it into production. Why did you pick that? Do,
Right.
any examples that you can think of? Change names, protect innocent parties, but I'm just curious if you have any war stories to share about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny. I think this is where you and I are very good. I've had things presented to me many times as potential POCs, but I will usually say no. Like, I like to succeed when I go into a POC. I like to know what I'm getting myself into. I like to have a good understanding and the business relevance of what we're doing. And you and I have said from very beginnings, look, you and I have a certain set of skills. I mean, clearly engineers, but we're really good at looking at it from a business perspective and identifying things that are potential winners that are going to come out. Like, and we
Right.
don't spend time, and this is what we can look at a problem and go, that's great for AI. That's not great for AI. And this is where you and I are great at. Like, we're really good at identifying business problems where you can take this advanced technology and you can apply it to and have a maximum probability of success. So I don't have POC failures per se. I don't. I mean, like, I look at something, I will, as part of the conversation with any user, go or client, say, look, that's not a real potential option for the technology. It's not something we should be spending our time on, but in you discussing your business, let's go here instead because I think this is a higher probability of success and will provide you more value in the long term. So I like to
Yeah,
cut things
and
out before they become problems.
it's interesting because that sounds like sort of what you're saying is, people maybe start with ideas about how do I leverage AI, or how do I create something around this new tool or capability I read about, versus starting with, is there a real business problem that's addressable? And then, the secondary question becomes, is AI one of the tools to help address this business problem? Not how do I use
Right.
this cool tool? Yeah.
Right. And I've had plenty of conversations with companies where, as well, I think AI will solve this problem. And then I dive and go, well, no, it most definitely will not. In fact, it'll probably add a level of complexity. But maybe you just go back to, say, one case, traditional analytics, which would easily solve your problem. And you don't
Yeah.
need to do. AI has unfortunately become a buzzword to a lot of people. But
You and I have had multiple conversations with clients where what starts out as a conversation about generative AI becomes a conversation about either traditional AI being actually what's needed for the business problem, or even, as you said, sometimes it's just analytics and reporting and aggregating data.
right,
And it really comes back to pinpointing the business problem and then thinking without bias about how do you solve the problem, without preconceived
right,
notion that it's an AI problem or not an AI problem.
right. And I think this is where, again, I go back to you and me. We have, you know, decades of experience each working closely with business people on the business side many times, being able to readily identify high probability of success projects where we think we can get this over the goalpost and ultimately get it in production. And that's incredibly hard and I think valuable to a lot of customers is that we don't waste time anti-teaching people using a POC as somebody who wants to play with the technology to kind of buttress a resume. It's you have
Yeah,
a problem. We think this is a real business problem. Can we? Because that's a big step taking things. Look, if a business user
yeah,
sees something as a value from a potential POC, the probability of getting it past the goalpost and into production is going to be significantly higher.
yeah, yep. You and I have a lot of similar experiences on this. One of the things I used to really get frustrated at, and I still do, is I think that we collectively as an industry, like, people start to get careless about the way that they use terms like proof of concept, POC, or minimum viable product, MVP.
Right.
And all too often, a POC is really, you say it, but what you're really talking about is playtime. You're talking about a sandbox, you're talking
Yes.
about some experimentation. Now, look, those are valuable things to do too. right? There's nothing wrong with
Right,
learning by doing and playing and experimenting. But those are not where you start when you have an actual business need to solve. And I used to sort of get emphatic about the point that like a POC, it's a test. You are trying to prove or disprove a specific set of things.
right,
And a POC should be no bigger than it needs to be to prove the thing that's unknown. And so in the early AI days, I used to always say, well, most POCs, the output of them should not be a dashboard or screen or something that looks cool to people. The output should be a number between 0 and 1. Right. It should be, in other words, it should be if the POC is to test whether a model will work given the data you have available, you can do that without designing a UI. You can do that by simply
right,
running and testing the model and generating a series of numbers between 0 and 1, and you can assess if you have a viable model or not. And your POC should literally be that small. What's the minimum I need to do
right,
to test the unknowns in my solution chain so that I
right.
can decide if there's a real project here?
No, 100%. You're absolutely correct. And exactly, you have an unknown. You don't know what it's going to take. You want to make that unknown a known quantity so you can make an accurate assessment going forward. One, is it a viable potential project that you can do? Can you solve this problem? Two, and if so, what is it going to cost in terms of time and money to
Right.
successfully do that? So it's, to me, it's a risk mitigation strategy. It is not playtime. It is not a, I need to learn. Yes, you're going to learn, and you might learn things that you weren't expecting to learn, but it's less about, in the case with AIs, do I have the right data? Do I have the right this? Am I thinking about it the right way? There's a lot of other things to learn. But it is not, and I think where you and I come at a lot of this, and it's, especially I think with artificial intelligence and generative AI, you have to come at it from a business angle. And I think it's most organizations, and you and I both seen this, is they tend to dump the AI component under technology divisions. And I think
Mhm.
that is, I understand why you do it. And I don't, necessarily dispute it, but I also don't necessarily think that's always the proper home for it. Without having a organizational structure in place that works and aligns extremely close, especially more with AI than anything else, with the business side, because it is an absolute imperative to being successful.
I think that's right. And no, it doesn't matter how innovative or sexy your AI solution is, if you build it without having the business involved early on, your chances of being able to actually turn it into a real solution are greatly reduced, we'll say, right?
Right. No, 100%. Exactly. And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean
No, no,
to cut
I
you off
just
there.
I also wanted to say you said something I really like, and I want to turn it. I want to borrow it and turn it into my tagline, which is you said that like the goal of a POC is to turn the unknowns into knowns.
Right.
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 I love
Right.
that. That's like that's a very succinct and brilliant way of saying it because
Thank you.
as
I'll
you can
take that.
tell, I get passionate about people misusing those terms. I'm going to take a few seconds to climb off my POC soapbox, do some deep breathing, and sort of like ground myself. But I think POCs are about turning unknowns into knowns. I love that.
I mean, and I think that's, and I think that gets lost, I think, generally speaking, it just gets lost. And again, going back to the topic is how do you get things into production? I like to know where I'm going. And to me, this is a step in the process. And it's why I want, what I like is when you have business users, especially for business users involved, you're shaping this. It's a piece of the puzzle to get you to the end game. It's not like, well, I'm going to go off and play with this because I want to see, what generative AI can do or what AI capable of doing. It's, I have a problem. I'm trying to solve that problem. This is a step to reduce the risk of successfully executing on that solution, and I'm going to do it. And that will get me to the end game and get this over, showing real
Right.
progress. And that's important. That's a big, in big enterprises, it's really,
Yeah.
really, really important to show progress towards an end state to get things done.
So you said in there that one of the thought processes should be, I have a problem, right? And I agree. I think the other part of that is you have to ask yourself, do I have the right problem? And what I mean by that is all too often people find a problem, but it might be a little bit contrived, or it might be a little
Yes.
bit, it's a problem that if I brutally honest with myself, it might be a problem I cherry picked because I want to use this AI approach to solve a problem. And so
100%.
the real question is this problem one that is of sufficient magnitude to the business and is aligned with what the business cares about, KPIs, somebody's
Right.
compensation package, or whatever it is? Is it relevant enough to the business that they would actually go through some pain to solve the problem? Because that's the other key
Right.
thing. None of this is free. It's not just a matter of you're going
No.
to spend some time and some money. There is going to be effort at introducing a solution into the way the business works. You have
Right.
said many times previously that you can't introduce AI into a business process without also impacting the way the process operates, right? So the point
Right.
is, the business needs to not just say, sure, I'd love to have you solve that problem. They have to say, this problem hurts enough that I'm willing to go through a little discomfort and effort to come out the other side with a solution to the problem.
Right, 100%. And it's funny because I learned these lessons, the hard way working in finance for so many years and being on a trading floor. Like when you were developing trading systems or adding features, it was because you were the big guy here is, am I going to make money from this? And that was always the holy grail. I'm adding this because I'm going to make more money than I would have made before because you're eliminating some pain for me. And that was always the question that you normally asked. So, it wasn't because, I wanted something cool. It was, well, am I helping them make money? And is this feature or whatever I'm building going to help them make money, going to get them there? If the answer is yes, then you go through the pain of building it, you do it. And that to me was always kind of the guiding way of doing some of the stuff. It's not because I wanted to play.
So it's a really good point. Am I going to make money is a very clear cut, easy to understand criteria for like how do you
Right.
measure success? I think for a lot of projects, the success measurement isn't as easy, right? Like take
No.
the example of a lot of companies. Obviously, we've talked about this before, but a lot of companies in the last year and a half have been exploring various forms of using generative AI to enable customer interaction channels, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's helping human CSRs talk to customers or whether it's replacing some channels with AI. And yet they don't actually measure customer satisfaction. So how in the world could
No.
you know if that was a successful solution? Yeah, you might look at, efficiency metrics around how many calls you handled and how much you spent handling them. But if
Right.
you don't have the right set of metrics, and in this case, if you're not understanding, for example, customer satisfaction and whether you have hurt it or helped it, how would you possibly determine whether you actually had achieved success in that use case?
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's funny. A lesson I learned very early in my career. Um, you have to know what questions to ask to get the answers. And if you don't ask the right questions, like you said, you're not gonna get the answers. So, it might seem sexy and cool. Yeah, I built a nice chatbot and it helps the users. But, I think like a lot of companies, we've been on those chatbots, especially pre-Gen AI, and we're beyond frustrated and we hate them. And nobody
Yeah.
asked me, do I like this? And I'm like, if you would ask me, I tell you, no, they're horrible. I want to talk to a body. I want to talk to a
I
person.
I think I might once or twice in my life have literally started rage screaming into my phone, I want to speak to a human
Yeah.
representative, right? Um, not
Yeah, I
saying
do
I
the
do
same
it. I'm not
thing.
saying I do it every week,
I
but
have done the same thing.
yeah, yeah. So
It's hard not
it's
to. It's frustrating.
it's terribly frustrating. It's terribly frustrating. And so I think
You
that's,
know,
that knowing what to measure and to know whether you're helping or God forbid hurting the situation is key on this.
oh, it's
Um,
absolutely key. And I
yeah,
think this goes back to look, I think, again, I will say this over and over again, to those listening. You and I are good at looking at business problems, and I think assessing doing at least a mental cost benefit analysis for somebody, or, if somebody's X, we're like, no, this is Y is better. We understand your process, so we think this is the better place for the tech. I think we're good at that because those are the ones who are going to get across the line. Those are the ones we think that have the highest value, or they provide some foundations to another
yeah,
project that provide even more value. So you kind of look at the big picture.
yeah,
And you and I've seen this multiple times, and I won't say with other firms, but the other firms who will do any POC possible because they're told it's a POC, and won't
Right.
assess the value. And I think that creates a lot of negative consequences
Yeah.
on a lot of different
Yeah.
sides. Well, you did something and it failed and it was never going to be successful in the first place. And I don't think that's the right approach with any of this. I think you need to, um, again, it's always cheaper to do things up front rather than, getting halfway through something and realizing, oh, this should have never done this in the first place. If you ask the right questions up front.
Yeah. Well, so
No.
really good point. It's cheaper to do it up front. I'd rather disprove my hypothesis early than later, right? So if the answer to some of those unknowns from a POC is no, you just don't have the right data to do this, or no, the cost of inferencing would not be worth what it would, the benefit you would get, find that out up front. I'd rather have a POC where the outcome is us deciding that there's not really a valid project to continue building than to
Right.
build the project and have it ultimately be viewed as a waste of time and resources. Um,
Right. Right,
yeah,
right. No, 100%. I remember, I think when we were starting out, somebody had asked us, put together a questionnaire to pre-assess some of these problems. I'm like, well, that's that, I think you and I thought about it a little bit and ultimately concluded, really, it's not the right approach. Any of this, you want, individuals like I said, who can kind of go in and understand. I think again, when people ask me what it is we do, and I'm like, well, our superpower is that we can understand your business and then the technology, how it fits into your business. To me, that's more important than, just we have great tech chops, which we do, but let's understand how your business operates. Let's understand what's in
yeah.
your head. Let's play psychologist for a while, and then we decide that's where we can help you. And that's the value. And I think that's the key to getting things because having buy-in and having commitment from business users is an enormous component to being successful. They're gonna stay with you as you go through this journey, and the journey is never linear because there's so many things you're going to figure out along the ride that it's going to take time to get the journey to the end state. And having a business user who is committed and believes that this is going to help him significantly or her significantly is a big it's a necessity. It's going to get you through the tough times because they see the end state and they see the value.
So if you were coaching a business leader on this, I mean, it's interesting. I'm thinking about what you said, and it feels like there is something different here. If I'm talking to a C-level leader in an organization, I would probably give them permission to outsource thinking about the network to their CIO, right? Like you're a business leader. You don't need to
Right,
think about your network. You don't need to think about cybersecurity beyond the level that everybody in the company needs to have an awareness and act responsibly. But
right,
like in terms of standing up firewalls and scanning for threats and stuff, that's the CISO's job, right? So there
right,
is the point of that is traditionally there's a lot of aspects of technology that a business leader should set the goals, create the framework, but then let the technology leader get on with doing it. And that
right.
is also the case with actual coding historically in traditional coding. um, AI doesn't feel like that, right? Like I think what based on what you
No.
said, what would you tell a business leader about what their relationship between the business and the technology group and AI should be?
Well, the first question I ask a business user is, would you outsource your business strategy to somebody else who knows nothing about your business? The answer is probably no. Would you
Right.
outsource your CFO or all these operations? The answer is probably no. You're not going to outsource your core business to another organization. But in essence, in some cases, what I think a lot of business leaders are doing is they are doing precisely just that. And I don't mean outsourcing it. They don't understand. Look, you and I know, and having been in the weeds of this for a long time, the technology is AI, generative AI, agentic AI, all is incredibly complicated. To do it right,
Yep.
it's a
Yep.
complicated, and it is going to have massive impact on your businesses, your business operations, your business. It's a force multiplier, however you want to look at it.
Yep.
You need to understand and really understand the true value of what the technology can do, and you need individuals who can help guide you along that journey and get you and show you how to apply these technologies. Because I think if you don't do that, it's the beginning of the end of your business. That's just, I know I'm taking a hard line view on it, but you can't
Yeah.
outsource. These are intellectual type jobs. It's a different type of the software is different. It's not just I'm
Yeah.
hooking up a new API to make things go faster, or this is something that is going to really remove a lot of thinking, I think, in a lot of places. It's just you need
Yeah.
to appreciate how it's going to impact your business.
I've spent the
How do you
last
think that?
decade and a half, I've spent like a decade and a half saying to people, your data strategy is your business strategy, right? Like it's more than that they have to be interlinked. Like your everyone's business is so dependent upon data. I don't care whether you're a manufacturer, a service provider, like data is part of every business. And I think,
Right.
10 or 12 years ago, everyone started to realize that. The Economist published their famous article about data is the new oil, and that became
Oh
like the
yeah, I
buzzword
know.
for a long time, right? But I have been arguing with people forever that, your data strategy is your business strategy. Do you think that applies to your AI strategy? Would you actually say, look, your AI strategy is your business strategy? Is that an overreach
More
or?
so, no, I don't think it's no. I think it's in many cases an underreach. Yes, 100%. I do think data strategy is also integral to all this as well, obviously. But yeah, no, I think your AI strategy is your business strategy, and you have to look at this from a business perspective. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of CEOs have outsourced that thinking to the CIO, and that's not, I think, the answer. Because you look at a lot of
Yeah,
organizations, and they very often, unfortunately, look. My view on the CIO is it should report into the CEO. It should not be outsourced and put
right.
under the CFO or the COO or HR for that matter, someplace else. It's buried. The
Right.
CIO, if in fact it's going to own the AI strategy, which I don't always think that's the right answer, they need to be at that level where they can communicate to those that would really understand the value of the technology. This is very different. And I keep saying that to everybody. This is very different. This is not your father's technology. This is very
Yeah.
different. A lot more
So this
powerful.
that has a big implication on the skills and the knowledge that business leaders need to have. But before we go into that, I just have to tell you as a sidebar. It's the first time I ever heard the word underreach, and the 10-year-old in my brain immediately started picturing T-Rexes with their little stunted front paws who can't reach anything.
Yes.
Don't know why. I had to confess that. Had to get that out of my brain.
That was in some
Um,
Pixar movie too.
yeah, so I'm now a forever view like T-Rexes with their underreach.
So
But before I
true.
took us entirely off track, uh, what do you think are the implications then in terms of what leaders need to know about AI for this model to work that you described, right? Because if they're not turning this over and entrusting it to others in the business, that implies that they need to have a more close familiarity with this technology and how it works and what it does than they probably have ever had with any previous technology.
I honestly, and again, I will say this, and I know CEOs are busy. They're of course always busy. This is a wave of change, or this is a sea of change that's going to hit them. And I think it's best to be educated. Even look, you don't have to be an expert like you and me, but you have to at least understand the parameters of the capabilities of what's changing and how you can apply it to your business. And yes, you need to have people around you who can say yay or nay, but you can't outsource this. You can't outsource this
Right.
to a another somebody just checked it. Okay, I took care of my AI strategy. Tom owns it now. I'm going to go off and keep doing what I do. I don't think you can do that. Now, you need experts like us on the outside who can provide you with insight, who can provide you with how we're going to help you drive the business with the technology, where you should apply it. People like us who spend our days understanding the nuances and the depth and everything else. You need that. That takes a long time to build up internally. And you need people who understand how to apply it to your business. You need that, but you need to be engaged. And I think that is imperative. And going back to the whole call, that's going to help get things into production so that your level of success is much higher at the end of the day.
Right.
A lot of everything else is the mechanics of doing it, which are important, but you need to do the right projects and understand the implications.
Sticking with the human and organizational factors for a minute, you pointed out at the beginning of this discussion that maybe, focusing, calling it getting it into production was selling it short, that more needs to happen to that. And so, I think, we're talking about leaders and how the tone gets set from the top. And there's also the aspect of once a solution goes into production doesn't mean it's actually going to be adopted and used effectively. And with AI, there are lots of stories about, human rejection of AI, or conversely, human over reliance on AI. So I think let's
Right.
explore that a little bit because I think there's a lot to mine there.
Well, and you and I have spoken about this many times. As AI enters the organizations, there's a high fear factor for a lot of people. And, I think some of that fear is warranted, some's not. I think a lot of it in the news, if you listen to the news, it's overhyped. Not everybody's going to lose their jobs tomorrow. I certainly don't think that, never have. It's not going to replace people tomorrow. It's not. And I also don't think, call it AGI, it's not around the corner either. Um,
Right.
I do think, and you and I have said this a million times, having educated employees or in the organization that understand the parameters of the tech is really important and very helpful in engagement, embracing, and and implementation. I think that is
Right.
very important. And having everybody engaged or with knowledge is important. And I don't mean, oh, I know how to use ChatGPT. That's not what I mean.
Right.
That's everybody knows everybody knows how to use ChatGPT. It's what are the capabilities of this? How is it going to affect my job? How can I embrace it for my job? Where can I use it in my job? How can I make my job better?
Yeah.
All that needs to be, it's education.
And if you look at through the lens of a specific solution that's rolled out, right? I think if that solution is not transparent and you haven't also managed like the human adoption of that solution, what you risk is that people look at it, they see it, they like, okay, AI says the answer is X, and they'll just discount it and say, well, that's nice, but I think the answer is Y, and you ignore it. Right. And
Right,
at the end of the day, this is something that, look, this is not new to AI. This has been a challenge for analytics going back decades, which is you can have you can have the best next best action recommendation on a dashboard, but if the person viewing that recommendation doesn't believe it and doesn't trust it
right,
and elects not to do it, you have not actually impacted anything. And I think that problem
right,
is maybe even greater with AI because it is inherently opaque unless you do a lot of work to make sure people
right,
understand it.
right. Going back to the complexity of this stuff and actually getting it into production. It's not easy.
Yeah. And it's funny because just to make it sound even more impossible, the inverse problem also exists, which is you don't want people to be overly dependent upon it in the sense that, again, depending very much on what the use case is and what kind of AI you've
Right,
deployed, there are going to be situations when you want people to retain some human agency and not to just, do everything that an AI solution says you should do. And a very simple analogy is what would happen if everyone just, asked ChatGPT to generate an email for them and cut and pasted it into their email without ever reading it.
right.
I know even when I've used AI to take my own thoughts and rephrase them into an email where I just spell out stream of consciousness thoughts, every
Yeah.
once in a while some crazy stuff creeps in that I didn't say, and it's clearly like the model's doing a little weird hallucinating and glitching. And,
Right.
if I just had blind trust, I would look like a fool. Um,
100%. I absolutely agree. No, look, same thing. We've all done that and look at it, go, what the hell did that thing just come out of with?
yeah,
But I think this just goes back to, look, you said, again, getting AI into production. It's, I look, these are incredibly powerful, helpful tools, but they're not infallible. And I think, we tend to think that they are. Look, we all do what I do. And I go, let me query AI about this, and oh, AI said this, or ChatGPT said this, or Gemini said this,
yeah,
and you realize sometimes some of the stuff it spits out is like you look at it, go, huh? That's so
yeah,
incredibly wrong.
yes,
You can't lose
yes,
that. You can't lose that. I think people forget. They get very accustomed. And I think goes back to training individuals on the capabilities and the limitations of the technology. That yes, here's a recommendation. It's not necessarily fact. Here's a recommendation. Yes, the models have gotten better and they're going to continue to improve. And yes, that's all true. But still, you have to use that information. You have to think, use your brain and say, hey, is this, but that's part of training
yeah,
with getting these models into production and making sure people fully appreciate and understand that.
yeah,
Um, and that just takes time. It's
it does.
again,
We
not like
we
it's
put a
an
lot of
oil.
time. we spent a lot of time talking about like the human, the organizational factors. Let's talk too about some of the technical things, right? Like the data availability and the quality of the data, and the other one that I think pops up a lot is um, security, privacy, like the other sort of safety challenges that come up.
Right.
Those are often things that we see as stumbling blocks, and too often late in the game stumbling blocks for projects.
And I will
Pick
say
one.
this:
We'll start. Yeah.
you're 100% right. And also, I will say this too. And we've hit this with customers many times. Cost of running this in
Yeah.
production,
Yeah.
and that is something that needs to be dealt with up front, not at the end, because if
Yeah.
that bites you, it's going to bite you big. But
I know one of your pet peeves has been that a lot of people, discount the option of doing some form of model fine tuning or model distillation to create a more tailored small model, and they discount it because there is upfront cost associated with it. But to your point, if they don't take into account the inferencing costs over time, then doing something that costs a little smaller amount to set up, but has a per usage charge, or in the case of Gen AI, a per token charge.
right.
And as you scale the usage, your cost goes up and up and up and up. And, so not having that good understanding of what the various costs are and how the different architecture options might affect your long-term operating cost for a solution, that's a killer.
Oh, I had a conversation with a startup way back when, and it worked in a foundational model. I'm like, great, now scale it out to the hundreds of thousands of users you'd like to use this with, and all of a sudden your costs are like literally, well into the eight figures a month. I'm like, well, is
Yeah.
that a scalable? Is that a scalable approach? No, it's not. And again, you have
Right.
to think about these things at the beginning, not the end. Uh, all of which a well-defined, proper POC should help you again reduce the risk of what you're trying to build here. But
And but that also goes back to our earlier point about the business role in this and business engagement, because I remember talking to another company once, and they had rolled out a customer facing AI powered solution, and the technology team knew that the cost per inference or cost per interaction was going to be X, right? What they didn't really understand and hadn't actually communicated with the business stakeholders about was how many interactions there would be, how many interactions were required to generate a sale, how many times historically the same customer would come back and interact with us over and over again. And so when you look in a vacuum at some arbitrary number, $3.85 per interaction, that doesn't necessarily raise a red flag. But if you then look at the number of interactions that have to happen to close this deal with the customer, the number of interactions
right,
happening in a month, exactly like you said, suddenly it's not $3, it's, 40 or $50 per customer prospect per month, etc.
right.
And compare that to traditional support costs, and maybe it doesn't make sense. Um,
No, 100%. And I think most people fail to realize the cost of running AI in production environments is a lot higher than it is for non-AI type of projects.
right.
It is high, and you got to be aware of that. And that's something about moving AI projects into prod. You have to be very, very cognizant of the costs because they can hit you hard, especially in the cloud.
Yep. Cost is the big one. I think,
Yes.
let's talk about the other sort of, call them gatekeepers, and I don't mean that in a negative way. So if any of you are information security professionals or privacy professionals, 100%, these are really, really important functions. I say gatekeeper in the sense that all too often we see AI projects go from POC to some early version, some pilot project, to a more fully baked
Right.
project. And only when they have invested significant amounts of time and money into it do they then start to, they get serious now about moving into production, and suddenly they're faced with challenges and questions from cybersecurity, from the networking team, from
Right. Right.
infrastructure about the compute requirements, from data privacy, from legal, from compliance, etc. So that's a whole theme
Yes.
of like waiting until the end to find and speak to these partners.
No, 100%. I think you're absolutely correct, especially compliance and security, who, I think. A lot of engineers tend to wait till the end for that, and then they have those conversations. But those are the things you want to have up front because you want to understand, especially with it goes back to also the data that you're going to be using and the quality of data and all that. You have to, hopefully a part of POC, one, you understand what data you do have, what shape it's in, what's the cost of cleaning it so I can actually use it. All very important in moving things into production to be aware of. But like you said, compliance, security, bringing them as painful as it sometimes is, earlier the better is going to mitigate risk. It's going to increase the likelihood of a successful project and not finding something at the end that, oh my God, I can't do this
Yeah.
because I'm including something in the data that I should have never allowed to happen and I could have, mitigated up front.
It's a little bit like the dentist. Going and talking to the cybersecurity team about your project, it's like the dentist. You can put it off, and you can put it off quite a while, but eventually you're gonna have to go. And the
You
longer
gotta have
you
the
put it off, the
conversation.
less pleasant it's gonna be when you go. Like it's just easier to have the conversation up
Oh,
front,
yes.
right? A
Yes,
little
yes, and yes.
prevention. Yeah.
Goes a
And it's
long
true. I mean,
way.
yep. And it's funny because in security, we start to see that. I think other areas are lagging, but security in large companies, especially, you hear the concept of security by design, which, among other
Right,
things, implies that you're interacting with the security team, you're getting their concerns, and you're building in mitigants to controls they might have early in
right.
the project. And frankly, that's a huge, not only does it mean you don't have to rebuild your architecture, it also helps you understand your cost, your performance, like other things better up front.
Oh,
So
100%. And with AI, I think, especially since most of the stuff is in fact running in the cloud, usually
yeah,
not in your own VPC or in a controlled environment that you like, and the likelihood of information getting out of the perimeter of control of security is fairly high.
yeah,
Those concerns have to be addressed up front. You have to think about those things sooner rather than later. What data am I going to send over to OpenAI or somebody else or Google in the model, or am I going to decide to host something myself? Am I willing to assume the risk of that and the cost of that? And does that make sense in my use case or whatever problem I'm trying to solve? But these are
yeah.
things that finding out 10 months into a 12-month project that all of a sudden I have some massive security concerns and retrofitting the code and the data is going to put us out another 6 months is not something you don't have that conversation.
No, no, you don't. So I guess, big barrier to production is just that lack of anticipating, engaging early in all of
Right.
those, necessary support functions, security, legal, compliance, privacy. Um,
Hmm.
and look, some organizations, some of you listening, may not have a formal data privacy organization, right? If you're a
Right.
smaller company and you're not operating under GDPR, for example, you may not have people with officially designated as the data privacy team. That doesn't mean you don't have potential data privacy issues in solutions you create. So, that maybe makes it
Right.
harder because now instead of having to go through a formal toll gate with data privacy, you've got to go find the people in your organization who understand data privacy issues, and you've got to figure out up front whether the project you want to embark on, what are the potential data privacy concerns and how will you mitigate those?
Right.
So
Right.
just because you don't have someone with that job title who's going to come knocking at your door saying, "Hey, you forgot to talk to me," doesn't mean you can ignore that topic.
No, no, no. Because the last thing you want, especially on an external facing chatbot, for argument's sake, is a customer finding out things they shouldn't find out, and your reputational risk is shot. And that's
Yeah.
something you have to think about. And one thing I know we're coming kind of towards the end that I want to make sure a point we want to get across is like most models change. Data changes over time, and you might not be getting the
Yeah.
response that you got earlier. So I think it's important that you have traditional AI ops involved here and having
Mhm.
operations around this, and because your responses might degrade because the
Yeah.
information you use to train a model is archaic or old or things have changed in the markets or whatever it may be, that you have to embrace the fact that you're going to have to periodically retune or retrain these models in a lot of cases. You need a process in place to say, hey, you know what, my responses are degrading, the quality of the model isn't what it was, because things have changed, and I now need to go fix that. And you have to make that part of the process. It's like traditional analytical models. They drift, they change over time, and as
Right.
data changes, you need to periodically retune them, and that holds true with this as well.
So when you say my responses are degrading, you don't mean it's an LLM calling you stupid. You mean things like precision and recall are deteriorating over
Yes,
time, or the validity or
exactly.
the relevance of the answer is not as good as it used to be. Yeah, and
Correct.
that's
Yes, yes,
that's a
yes.
real. Just want to make sure you weren't saying that your model was insulting you, and I felt
Well, hey,
degraded by that.
if you use Grok, it will insult you. You know that. You can actually go. It's got a degree. It's got a mode. I tried it out.
Yes. Um, No, I think that's actually a really good point. I think a lot of, we are so used to this idea with traditional applications that there's a cost to build it and put it in production, but then it's got a fairly steady state run cost unless you decide to
Right.
do some enhancements. Whereas with AI, as you're saying, you've got to continuously monitor what's happening through AI operations or ML machine learning operations. You've got to monitor not just the statistical validity and relevance of its output, but like the real world impact.
Mhm.
And there's care and feeding that associate with this.
Oh, there's 100% care of feeding, and I think that's grossly underestimated and often forgotten about. Not even actually forgotten about, not even thought about until it's evident that you need it, which is 2 months after you've been running it into production. And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, we're not getting responses that we thought we were getting. It's degrading over
Right.
time. What happened over here? And then you realize, well, I got to put a process in place to manage the output, test the output periodically, and periodically retrain these things. Otherwise, I'm going to look really bad. And I think that's often forgotten about. It's all these
Right.
ancillary things as part of putting these things into production that your average users, not average users, you're not thought through in detail. And there's a
Yeah.
lot there. And you and I, coming up through analytic backgrounds in a lot of cases, we appreciate that this has to happen.
Right. Right. Um, let's talk for the last part of this about the granddaddy of these topics in terms of what it takes to get to production, and that is the data or the data, depending on how you want to say it, right? So,
Yes.
um, it's the grand data of this topic. Like, yeah, um, this is probably, I think, it, again, is one of the biggest challenges people discover too late in the game is that they don't understand not just do I have the data, but is it good enough? Is it consistent enough? Is it timely enough? And can I even get to it?
Right.
Right? Like let's talk about that because that's I think that's probably a blind spot for a lot of people.
No, I think it's a lot. I think for most people, I think it's a blind spot. I don't think they, it's funny. And, I've been at supposedly data savvy organizations, and you realize as data savvy as they think they are, they're certainly not data savvy, and they overlook data that they should use. It's not readily available in some cases. They don't understand the complexity of it, what it's going to take to put it into a format that's actually usable. A whole host of questions come up that were not thought through or thought about, or how you want to phrase it.
Well, let's pick on a couple of
So,
those. I think, for me, one of the
yes.
interesting ones is, first of all, they don't even, it's easy to not fully appreciate what data you have and don't have, right? Because we're now
Right.
talking about the ability to think of
So,
unstructured data as viable and accessible data, which is relatively recent in terms of when it
mhm.
became economically attractive to get to that data.
Right.
But the other point is like people don't typically don't stop and think about upfront what I'll call the shape of that data. So
No.
again, I recall a situation a couple of years back where a team was talking about building an AI model, and in their test data, they could create an interesting AI model, and it was based on some customer feedback that was obtained, and they had verified up front that yes, this customer feedback was part of a standard process. They were collecting it. They'd been collecting it. They had about a 3-year history of this customer feedback. What they failed to do was to actually spend time really analyzing and profiling the content of that customer feedback. And if they had, they would have realized that it was meaningless. That the way in
Right.
which they asked for the feedback, and maybe when in the customer interaction they asked for the feedback, and the incentive or lack of incentive that they offered for the customer to give them thoughtful and honest feedback, meant that it was all the same, right? It's
Right.
like
Right.
sometimes it's easier just to check, yep, good, 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 let me go. I'm going to click good 3 more times. I'm done with your stupid survey,
Yep.
right?
100%.
So,
Nobody wants to spend time doing
okay,
that.
Interesting project, but at the end of the day, completely useless because the data that they
Right.
thought they'd collected, they hadn't actually understood the shape of that data, and it turned out not to be as useful as they thought.
Well, so you bring up an incredibly valuable point, and I think it's something that's often, I shouldn't say often, I'd say 99% of the time, completely and utterly overlooked. And yes, we talk POCs and POCs of generating, let's test the technology against the business problem. But does it make sense as part of this? And maybe it's not a POC in the sense that I'm developing something, but let's look at the data close. Let's POC the data. Let's assess the viability for an AI solution.
Right. Right. I mean, for me, one of the best POCs, a POC I'll always get behind, is the POC that is like, okay, I have data, I have an idea. Can I actually create a responsive model on the data I have? Right.
Right,
Given the modeling techniques available to me and the data I have, is there
right,
simpatico or is it just not going to work? Right.
right,
That's
right.
a key thing to
100%.
learn.
It's
Yeah.
funny because as you're speaking, I'm realizing that all the systems I built over the years, very intuitively, I always used to, the first thing I always did when I had access or was building onto an existing system is I took a deep look at the data. I always
Right.
did that. Like if I had a billion record, database argument's sake, I would actually group it, slice and dice to 14 ways to Sunday, look at get it. Like I wanted a feel of the data. I wanted to see if it was valuable. I needed to appreciate the data. I graphed it. I did all sorts of things, but I needed to know is it worthy or I needed to understand, and it was
Yeah.
very helpful in moving forward.
Yeah, I think, is the data there? Is the data of sufficient quality? These
Right.
are all really, really important topics. And then the other part is, can I get it? Can I use it? And that when I say can I use it, can I access it? There's a physical thing. Is it
Well,
sitting in a
and
place
then
where I can get it? There's costs. Is it at the right cost? And I think the one that also comes up a lot is it comes up as a surprise to people, I should say. So this is why I want to bring it up is sort of that
I know where you're going
legal
with this.
privacy compliance side of it, right? Like
Yep.
I've got data. Maybe it's data I collected from customers. And now the question becomes, but am I sure that I have the legal right to use it for this purpose? Just because I have the right to collect it doesn't mean I have the right to use it however I want to. And maybe more
Yes.
importantly, B, am I creating reputational risk by doing so? I might have the legal right to do it, but are my customers going to look kindly upon that if they discover I'm doing it? With other
Right.
data sets, it might be, we've all seen this. Peter, I know you've seen this too.
Yeah.
People who have an open open source data set. Again, just because I didn't pay for it doesn't mean I can use it any way I want to. There's going to be some sort of Creative Commons or other licensing scheme applied to that data, and you've got to understand, does the license you accepted in using that open source data allow you to use it in the way you are intending to? And that's also
100%.
relevant for data that you paid for. I mean, it's funny. You could
Yes.
argue whether you like this model or not, but if you go look at vendor data that you purchase in your organization, the vast majority of the time, there will be limitations around usage of that data, and you will not have the
Oh,
right to use it for
100%.
any old thing you want to.
No, in fact,
Yeah.
most of those limitations are you use it for the specific use case you're buying it for and nothing else. And it's
Yes.
not like you can use it for all these other things on top of it that put a lot of restrictions around it. I think is the normal way of doing it.
I
But you're
may or
right.
may
You're
not
absolutely
have
correct.
I may or may not have been working at a company once where the
Never did that.
vendor that provided some data may or may not have gotten curious about some interesting analytics that a different team was doing on that data. That may or may not have caused them to kind of look more broadly at how the data they were selling, the company was being used. And it
That
may
never
or may not have
happens.
resulted in them saying that that company owed them, multiple tens of millions of dollars in unpaid licensing fees because they had been
I
using
am.
data for years in ways that were outside the scope
Oh,
of the original data agreement.
I
So,
wouldn't be surprised if every major financial firm is has done that at some point or another.
yeah. Yeah. So, look, I say that because this is not just a hypothetical, right? There are real, you know, real
Right.
consequences
Right.
for this.
And I think it goes back to the beginning and getting things into production from a standpoint. There are a lot of things you can't overlook as part of the process. I mean, yeah, there are certain things maybe you overlook because the scope of what you're doing is very small. But generally speaking, as this technology gets more broadly deployed and it gets used in ways that weren't, most companies weren't envisioning because they didn't really appreciate what the technology can do, there are a lot of questions that need to be asked in order to
Yeah.
get things into a production environment. And it's not just pushing things over the lines. Oh, okay, we're in production. That is the least of it. There's a lot of questions that need to be asked. There's a lot you need to do, and you need to dot a lot of I's and cross a lot of T's, especially when it comes to customer facing things or where there are broad implications to deploying this technology that can cost the firm millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars.
So I sit back, I'm looking at all these things, and this has been, maybe it's been a little bit therapeutic to talk about all the things we wish we could have told people to do differently in the
Yep.
past. But I'm also conscious that I don't want this to sound like we're by no means are we saying don't bother trying, you can't get stuff into production, right? Because yes, it can be hard, but it's only hard if you don't have the right plan. It's only hard if you don't identify these potential challenges and obstacles up front and bake that into your plan, right? I mean, do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I'll even take that a step further. I think it's absolutely critically important to have the right people advising you on this stuff. That's going to increase the probability of success dramatically.
Yeah. So look, I,
Nice.
I think, for me, part of the message I want to make sure we say loud and clear is you can get these into production. Like, by no means are we saying AI is so hard that you can't build a production AI solution. That is 100% not what we're saying. I am very much in the camp that you can, and for the vast majority of companies, you should
Me too.
be building and deploying AI solutions into production. And I'm not talking about turning on a co-pilot assistant for your productivity apps. I'm talking about building real applications that have AI powering big parts of their functionality. This is the
Right.
goal. This is the necessity. You should do it. It's just that you should do it knowing up front not to fall into some of these traps that make you harder than it has to be.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in essence, we're telling you there are ways. You're right. I could have articulated it better than you, so I'll stop talking at that point.
And inferencing is expensive, as Peter said. It can cost significant sums of money. But if you find the right use cases, you will be more than happy to pay that cloud provider bill for inferencing costs because again, if you're focusing it in the right areas, you will see dramatic positive results. You'll see real cost savings, revenue growth, more profitable client relationships, whatever it is you are targeting. But again, it's on you as a business leader
Right.
or you as a technology leader to partner with your business leaders to pick the right projects, the right use cases, to make sure that what you're doing makes sense from an economic perspective, from a business strategy
Yes.
perspective, and from a technology perspective,
Right. Right. Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And
Just
then
do all
I
that, and
know
it's easy.
it's magic. It just happens. No big
Yeah,
deal. Um,
yeah.
it's the one thing and look, a lot of things have gotten easier, certainly with technology. But the one thing I will always say, right people are incredibly important. That the technology is such that it's not a matter of embracing or not embracing. I mean, certainly you cannot embrace it, but I think that is your competitors are certainly going to embrace this. Your competitors are going to apply it in ways that you have never thought about. They're going to use it and it's going to be of incredible valuable. It is imperative, I think, to every single business that they have to embrace
Yeah.
the tech and use it. Otherwise, I phrase it this way, tomorrow will be the beginning of your end if you don't. And I think, and I was not speaking with hyperbole too much, but I think that's true.
I talked to a older gentleman once, and he was using a hammer on a to build something where some of the people helping him were using pneumatic nail guns, and he made some remark about how like yeah these young punks can bring the pneumatic nail guns to work, and it just means they can hammer a nail faster. He said it in a less polite way. It also means they can make a mess of it faster because
Yeah,
having a
true.
really having a really fast pneumatic nail gun doesn't teach you where to nail. It just lets you put nails in the wrong spots faster.
Just a
So
lot easier.
yeah. So I think, that's probably there's probably an analogy with AI there that like if you're not careful, you can accentuate the bad parts of your business very quickly.
Right. And this is where, and
Um,
I get started. We start at the beginning of the conversation. People matter. Expertise matters more than anything. And I don't mean
yeah.
technical expertise, business and technical, and the intersection of all of them together matters more than anything.
All right.
We've gone
Well,
over. We
we've
went
gone
way
over.
over.
That's okay. That's okay. It's our
Yes, that's the
favorite
first.
topic. So,
Yes.
um, listen, I think hopefully another useful conversation. It's been at least therapeutic for me to, relive my angst, about
These are
some of the
really therapy
projects.
sessions. Well, these are really
Yeah.
therapy sessions for you and me. That's
Yeah.
all
It's
they
just
are.
like people get to watch us, process our trauma. Uh, so, all right.
We should have a
So,
psychologist on next time. Anyway,
yeah, we
well,
should do that. We should do that.
well,
So, and
thank you.
thank you for letting me share the Aloha shirt of the week. And
I love it.
we'll
We're taking
be.
donations for David to build up a large repertoire of Aloha shirts, by the way. So
That's right.
feel free to
That's right.
donate to David's Aloha Foundation.
Now I kind of want to see what I could get if I could get AI to design me a custom Aloha shirt pattern.
Oh,
And
is
I'm
that a
sure I could
challenge?
find a way to have
Is
it
that a
made.
challenge? Is that a
I'm
challenge?
gonna do it. I'm gonna do
Oh
it.
boy. Oh, that is a challenge done.
Yep. Yep. I'm sure I can get it made somewhere. So this is gonna be a real challenge. All right.
All right. Anyway, thank you very much for another great week, another great conversation, David, as
All
always.
right.
And look forward to today. Oh, I might not be on next week's though, but I look forward to the next one.
We might have a special guest next week. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
We'll
I'll be
see.
traveling. So
Um, More on that later. But Peter, always a pleasure. Thank you, and
same.
thank you for watching. If you're watching, and we'll talk to you next week.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye now.
All right, take care.